The red dust of Colony 9 tasted like rust and old blood. It coated the inside of Leora Hayes's throat, settled in the creases of her knuckles, and turned the midday sky into a bruised purple haze. She adjusted the heavy strap of the moisture evaporator tank on her shoulder, her boots crunching over the parched earth. At 23, Leora felt 40. Her back ached with a dull, rhythmic throb that matched the pounding of the atmospheric processors churning in the distance. She was not beautiful in the way the holovids from the core worlds described beauty. She was sharp angles and calloused hands, her hair a messy tangle of dark brown usually shoved under a cap. Her eyes the color of the storm clouds that never actually brought rain. She was tough because the colony demanded it, and sarcastic because it was the only way to keep from screaming. She kicked the door to the family unit open with her boot. "I'm home," she called out, dumping the tank on the metal floor. The debt counter on the wall greeted her with its glowing red digits. It had gone up again. Interest rates on the frontier were lethal, designed to keep people like her father working until their hearts gave out. Just as his had 6 months ago. Now the debt belonged to her, along with 2 younger siblings who thought dinner was something that appeared by magic rather than by credit extension. Her brother, Taryn, looked up from a pile of scrap metal he was trying to solder into a toy. The atmospheric scrubbers are making that noise again. "Leora, they are always making that noise," she said, wiping grime from her forehead. "It means we are breathing. Eat your ration bar." She moved to the tiny kitchen, checking the inventory. 3 nutrient packs left. Her paycheck from the hydroponics bay was not due for another 4 days. She did the math in her head, realized it did not work, and felt that familiar cold knot tighten in her stomach. She would have to take a shift at the smelter again. Then the sky went dark. It was not the gradual dimming of sunset. It was a sudden, absolute eclipse. The hum of the colony's power grid faltered, the lights flickering and dying before surging back on with a terrified whine. Leora ran to the viewport, Taryn scrambling beside her. Above the colony, blocking out the twin suns, hung shapes that defied engineering. They were not ships of metal and rivets. They were colossal, organic leviathans, their hulls shimmering with an iridescent oil-slick sheen. They looked like deep-sea predators grown to the size of continents, their bellies glowing with pulsating violet veins. The Galactic Empire. They had not come to this sector in 50 years. The last time they had appeared, they had burned a moon just to make a point about trade tariffs. Leora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing life support. "Get under the table," she ordered Taryn, her voice low and steady. A voice boomed across the colony, bypassing the local comms and resonating directly through the structural metal of the buildings. It was a voice that sounded like wet stones grinding together. "Citizens of Colony 9. You are in default." Leora gripped the edge of the viewport. The rebellion 3 sectors over had used Colony 9 as a refueling point once. Just once. The colonists had been too terrified to say no. Apparently, the Empire had a long memory. The voice continued. "Your reparations for aiding the insurrection are calculated at 400 billion credits. Immediate payment is required. Failure to pay will result in atmospheric sterilization." Leora let out a short, harsh laugh. 400 billion. They might as well have asked for the moon. "However," the voice said, shifting to a tone that was terrifyingly smooth, "His Imperial Majesty, the Sovereign of the Thousand Systems, is merciful. A singular alternative has been offered. The debt shall be forgiven. Protection shall be guaranteed. In exchange, the colony must provide a tribute. One bride." Leora frowned. "A bride?" one suitable human female, of childbearing age and genetic vitality, to be wed to the Emperor himself. The Emperor? Leora whispered. The rumors said the Emperor was ancient, a creature who had been ruling since before humanity even invented warp drive. He is dying, the voice intoned, as if reading her thoughts. He requires a companion to ease his passage into the void, a symbolic union to bind the outer fringes to the core. One girl to save a world. The lottery begins now. The screen on their wall lit up. It was not just their screen. Every screen in the colony, every data pad, every public terminal was flashing rapidly, cycling through the ID numbers of every eligible woman in the settlement. Leora watched the numbers blur. It was rigged. It had to be. They probably already picked someone. Some wealthy governor's daughter who would look good in the press photos. Or maybe they would take a convict so no one would miss her. The cycling slowed. Please not Kayla, Leora thought, picturing her best friend. Please not anyone I know. The numbers stopped. A face appeared on the screen. It was a grainy ID photo taken 3 years ago, when she had been tired and unsmiling, just like she was now. Leora Hayes, ID number 49 Alpha 7. The silence in the room was absolute. Taryn dropped his soldering iron. Leora stared at her own face. It was a mistake. It was a joke. She was nobody. She was a hydroponics worker with dirt under her nails and a mouth that got her in trouble. Outside, the airlock hissed. 2 minutes later, heavy boots hammered on their door. They did not give her time to pack. They did not give her time to shower. The Imperial Guard, soldiers encased in armor that looked like hardened insect shell, filled the small room. Her mother, who had been sleeping in the back room, stood in the doorway, her face pale and streaked with tears. Leora. Her mother sobbed, clutching Taryn. You cannot go. I will tell them no. You cannot tell them anything. Mom, Leora said, her voice sounding strangely distant to her own ears. Look at the sky. They will burn the colony, but to him? Her mother wept. They say he is a monster, a corpse kept alive by machines. Then I will be a widow soon. And I will come home rich, Leora said, forcing a grin that felt like splitting her lip. She grabbed her jacket. She knelt in front of Taryn and gripped his shoulders. You listen to me. You finish that toy. You help Mom. If I find out you slacked off because I was gone, I will come back from the Imperial Palace and kick your rear end. Do you understand? Taryn nodded, tears spilling over. Leora stood up. She looked at the lead guard, a faceless helmet of black chitin. Let us get this over with. I assume you did not bring a carriage. The walk to the shuttle was a blur of staring faces. The entire colony had come out to watch the sacrifice. Leora kept her chin up, refusing to look at the ground. She saw Kayla in the crowd, her hand over her mouth. Leora winked at her. I am being sold like spare cattle to a space crypt keeper, Leora muttered as she passed her friend. If he croaks before the wedding, I still keep the ring, right? Kayla let out a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. The shuttle ride was short and violent. When they docked with the massive arc ship above, gravity shifted. It did not feel like the artificial gravity generators of the colony, which hummed and vibrated. This gravity felt organic, a pulsing rhythm that pushed against her bones like a heartbeat. The airlock cycled open, and Leora stepped into a nightmare of beauty. There was no metal here. The corridors were lined with a pearlescent material that looked like bone, warm to the touch. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic cycle. Bioluminescent veins ran along the ceiling, pumping amber fluid that cast a golden light over everything. Windows lined the hallway, but they did not show the stars. They showed swirling constellations of data, holographic glyphs that danced and rearranged themselves in the air, tracking the ship's vitals. "Welcome aboard the Exaltation," a voice chirped. Leora jumped. A small drone, shaped like a teardrop of mercury, hovered at her eye level. It had a single blue eye that blinked. "I am Unit 7, the ship's artificial intelligence," the drone said. "And might I say, your heart rate is exceptionally high. Are you planning to vomit? The floor is self-cleaning, but it is considered rude." "I am not going to vomit," Leora snapped, stepping back. "I am just thrilled to be inside a giant intestinal tract." "Humor," Unit 7 said. "The medic said you would have high stress markers. Follow me." Leora followed the drone through the shifting corridors. They passed aliens of species she had only seen in terrifying stories. Tall, spindly creatures with 4 arms, massive hulks of rock-like skin, and beings made entirely of shifting light. They all stopped to stare at her, the human bride, the tribute. They were led to a medical bay that smelled of ozone and crushed flowers. An alien waited there, tall and slender, with skin the color of mint leaves and large, compassionate black eyes. "I am Healer Vrex," the alien said, his voice melodious. "Please, sit. We must prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" Leora asked, crossing her arms. "Embalming? I heard the groom is halfway there." Healer Vrex sighed, a soft whistling sound. "The Emperor Kael Draven is in a fragile state. The assassination attempt 6 months ago. It destroyed much of his physical form. He is in permanent stasis. So I am marrying a popsicle," Leora said, sitting on the exam table. The surface felt warm and molded instantly to her shape. "It is a symbolic union," Vrex explained gently, waving a scanner over her. "The Empire needs stability. It needs to show that the outer fringe is united with the core. You will be his consort. You will stand by his tank. You will look regal. And when he passes, you will be cared for." "Show me," Leora said. Vrex hesitated, then tapped a console. A holographic image shimmered into existence in the center of the room. Leora felt the sarcasm drain out of her, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. The figure in the hologram was a nightmare. It was a humanoid male, but gaunt to the point of skeletal. His skin was silver and stretched tight over bone. Tubes snaked into his nose, his throat, and the ridges of his spine. His eyes were open but dim, clouded with the milky haze of the half-dead. He looked ancient, fragile, and utterly repulsive. "This is Kael," she whispered. "This is the Emperor," Vrex corrected. "He hears nothing, sees nothing, but he lives." Leora looked away. She had sold her life for this, to be the nursemaid to a vegetable, a prop in a political theater. She felt a surge of anger so hot it made her dizzy. "Get that thing away from me," she said. Vrex deactivated the hologram. "Rest now. Leora Hayes. The journey to the capital takes 3 standard days." The days passed in a blur of anxiety and isolation. Leora stayed in her quarters, a room that felt like the inside of a seashell. She tried to sleep, but the silence of space was heavy. She dreamed, in her dreams. She was not on the ship. She was standing in a dark void, and eyes were watching her. Not the dim eyes of the hologram, but eyes of burning, electric violet. They were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a hunger that made her breath catch. She woke up gasping, her sheets tangled around her legs. She looked down at her hands. For a split second, in the dim light of the room, her palms were glowing. A soft, rhythmic pulse of light beneath the skin, matching the beat of the ship. She blinked, and the light was gone. "Stress," she whispered to herself, rubbing her hands together until the skin turned red. just stress. You are losing it. Leora, keep it together. On the third day, the exaltation dropped out of warp. Leora stood at the viewport of her quarters as the blast shields retracted. Her breath fogged the glass. The capital world, Ethelgard, hung in the void like a jewel. It was not just a planet, it was a work of art. Rings of silver orbital cities encircled the equator, connected to the surface by shimmering tethers that looked like threads of light. The planet itself was a swirl of violet oceans and emerald continents, framed by artificial auroras that danced in gold and crimson ribbons across the poles. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, and it was too big, too rich, too advanced. Leora felt a wave of vertigo. She was a speck of dust from a red rock, about to be swallowed by a galaxy that did not care if she breathed or suffocated. Preparation for the wedding began the moment they docked. Leora was ushered into a chamber filled with attendants who did not speak to her, only about her. The biological density is low, one whispered, measuring Leora's arm. Fragile structure, standard for the species. Another replied, it will suffice for the ceremony. They stripped her of her colony fatigues and dressed her in the wedding garment. It was not cloth, it was a living organism. The translucent, pearlescent material slid over her skin like cool water, then tightened, adjusting to her body heat. It pulsed softly against her ribs. It felt invasive, as if the dress was tasting her sweat. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. She looked ethereal, trapped in a second skin of shifting light. Her tough, sarcastic face looked small and frightened. She clenched her fists. No, she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She was Leora Hayes. She had survived sandstorms and debt collectors. She could survive a wedding. The doors to the grand ceremonial hall opened. Music, deep and resonant, vibrated through the floor. The hall was a cavern of crystal and light, large enough to house her entire colony. Thousands of alien nobles stood in tiered rows, a sea of silk and jewels and judgmental eyes. Leora walked down the central aisle. Her legs felt like lead. Up ahead, on a raised dais, stood the altar, and behind the altar, towering 20 feet into the air, was the stasis chamber. It was a cylinder of golden glass, filled with amber liquid. Inside, floating in the suspension fluid, was the figure she had seen in the hologram. The wires, the tubes, the withered gray skin, the Emperor. She felt bile rise in her throat as she passed the front row of courtiers, high-ranking nobles with elongated skulls and robes of woven light. She slowed. The acoustics in the hall were strange, carrying whispers as if they were shouts. A sneering courtier, leaning close to a companion, murmured, "Look at her, trembling like a prey animal." His companion chuckled darkly. A human girl was forced to wed a dying alien today. She has no idea he's actually our young, handsome Galactic Emperor. Leora stumbled. She caught herself, her heart skipping a beat. What? She looked at the courtier, but he was already looking away. Bored, young, handsome. She looked at the tank. The thing inside was a corpse. It was a joke. It had to be. Alien humor. Mocking the stupidity of the human who thought she was marrying royalty when she was really marrying a dead body. They were laughing at her ignorance. Anger flared in her chest, hot and steadying. Fine, let them laugh. She straightened her back. She would play her part, survive this farce, and send the money home. She reached the dais. The officiant, a being of floating robes and no visible face, waited. "Extend your arm," the officiant commanded. Leora held out her right hand. The officiant took a device from a pedestal, a circlet of glowing biotech metal, intricate and sharp. He placed it around her wrist. With a hiss, the circlet tightened. It bit into her skin, warm and heavy. A cable of light extended from the circlet and connected to the port on the stasis chamber. Do you, Leora Hayes of the Fringe, pledge your life force to the sustention of the Empire? Leora looked at the tank. The withered face floated in the amber fluid, eyes closed. I do, she said, her voice trembling but audible. The officiant pressed a key. The link activated. Leora gasped. It was not painful. It was shocking. A jolt of electricity surged from the chamber, through the cable, and into her wrist. It traveled up her arm and hit her heart with the force of a physical blow. But it was not the cold touch of a machine. It felt like a hand grabbing hers in the dark. It felt like a sudden intake of breath. For a second, the world greased out. Leora felt a sensation that had no words, a feeling of something dormant inside her chest waking up, uncoiling and reaching out to something inside that tank. It was a recognition, a key sliding into a lock. Then the sensation vanished. The connection settled into a low, steady hum on her wrist. The marriage is sealed, the officiant declared. The crowd applauded, a polite rustling sound like dry leaves. Leora stood there, breathing hard, rubbing her chest. She stared at the tank. For a moment, she could have sworn the figure inside twitched. But it was just the bubbles in the fluid. She was married. The reception was non-existent. As soon as the cameras cut the feed, the illusion of grandeur evaporated. Take her to the consort wing. A severe-looking alien woman in red robes ordered. The Regent Malik does not wish for her to be seen roaming the palace. Leora was marched out of the hall, down endless spiraling corridors that grew darker and quieter the deeper they went into the palace complex. The consort wing was beautiful, in a cold, museum-like way. The ceilings were high, the furniture carved from obsidian, the air smelling of sterile ozone. The guards opened a massive door and gestured her inside. You will remain here, the woman in red said, standing in the doorway. Your needs will be attended to. You are to look dignified. You are to produce no heirs, obviously. And you are to avoid causing trouble. The Emperor's condition is critical. Do not expect him to visit. With that, the door slid shut and locked with a heavy thud. Leora stood in the center of the vast room. She was alone. She walked to the bed. It was enormous, a slab of floating anti-gravity gel covered in silks. She sat on the edge, and the bed shifted instantly, molding to her hips. She looked at her wrist. The biotech circlet was still there, glowing faintly. She tried to pry it off, but it was sealed seamlessly to her skin. She walked to the wall. It was translucent, looking out over the interior of the palace courtyard. Far below, through layers of glass and steel, she could see the faint amber glow of the stasis chamber in the great hall. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall. She had done it. Her family was safe. The debt was gone. But she was trapped in a golden cage, light years from anyone who knew her name. Married to a ghost, surrounded by monsters who mocked her. She looked at her reflection in the glass, the living dress, the alien jewelry, the terrified eyes. Forced to wed a dying alien, she whispered bitterly to the silence, her breath fogging the view of the stasis tank below. What kind of life is this? The first week in the Imperial Palace felt less like a marriage and more like a very expensive, very shiny incarceration. Leora Hayes had expected a dungeon, or perhaps a harem out of the lurid holovids back on the colony. What she got was a schedule. Her life was measured out in 15-minute increments of humiliation disguised as education. Your posture suggests a spine made of wet gravel. Consort, said Zal. tapping a long, spindly finger against the air. Zal was her tutor, a creature that looked like a praying mantis made of polished obsidian, wearing a high-collared robe of stiff purple fabric. He hovered, literally, thanks to anti-gravity discs implanted in his knees, at eye level, circling her like a vulture inspecting a particularly disappointing carcass. "I am standing straight," Leora muttered, shifting her weight. The living dress she was forced to wear, a shimmering sheath of bioluminescent silk that felt like a second skin, tightened around her ribs in response to her annoyance. "You are slouching," Zal corrected sharply. "In the Imperial Court, a slouch implies weakness. Weakness invites predation." "Do you wish to be eaten, Consort Hayes? Because Regent Malik has a metaphorical appetite for the vulnerable, and Lady Saris has a literal one for imported delicacies." "I would hate for you to be confused with an appetizer." Leora rolled her eyes, catching the movement of a small spherical surveillance drone drifting near the ceiling. She had named that one Buzzy. There were 3 others, Snitch, Creeper, and Bob. "I am not an appetizer, Zal," Leora said, straightening up until her back cracked. "I am the bride, the peace offering, the girl who sold her life so her family could eat something other than dust." Zal stopped circling, his compound eyes, faceted and unreadable, fixed on her. "Precisely. You are a symbol, and symbols must be polished. Now, recite the lineage of the Draven dynasty, starting from the Age of Expansion." Leora groaned, but she did it. Over the endless days, between lessons on how to hold a goblet of volatile nectar without dissolving her fingers and how to bow without exposing her neck to assassination angles. She learned the history of the man, the thing, she had married, Emperor Kael Draven, according to the history file Zal forced her to memorize. Kael was not supposed to be the dying wreck in the tank. He was supposed to be a prodigy. He had ascended to the throne young, bypassing a dozen older, hungrier relatives. He had been a reformer, a brilliant tactician who wanted to integrate the outer fringe worlds rather than just exploit them. "He sounds like he was actually decent," Leora had remarked once. Scrolling through a datapad showing images of a sleek, silver-hulled fleet bringing medical aid to a plague world. "He was formidable," Zal had replied, his voice dropping to a whisper that the drones might miss. Too formidable for some. The attack that took his life, or rather, his vitality, was a tragedy, a chaotic strike by separatists. Or so the official report claims. Leora had caught the hesitation. "And that is why we have a Regency Council now?" "Yes," Zal had floated closer, his tone turning conspiratorial. "A council that manages his affairs until he recovers, or until he does not." Leora learned quickly that "until he does not" was the preferred outcome for most of the people running the Empire. She saw it in the way Regent Malik looked at her during the mandatory evening dinners. Malik was a towering figure with skin like pale blue marble and a voice like oil sliding over velvet. He would sit at the head of the table, Kael's seat, and smile at Leora with too many teeth. "The physicians say the Emperor's brain activity is minimal today," Malik would say, slicing into a piece of meat that was still quivering. "It is a mercy, really. He feels no pain. We must prepare ourselves for the inevitable. My dear consort, an orderly transition is what the Empire needs." Then there was Lady Saris, the Emperor's aunt. She was beautiful in a terrifying, sharp-edged way, draped in fabrics that smoked and curled around her body. She would touch Leora's arm with cold, manicured talons and sigh, "You poor thing, so young. To be a widow before you are truly a wife, but do not worry. When he passes, we will find a nice, quiet moon for you to retire to, somewhere far away." where you can be forgotten in luxury. They were waiting for him to die. They were practically checking their chronometers. Leora realized with a jolt of dark humor that she was the only person in the entire palace who had a vested interest in the Emperor staying alive. As long as he was breathing or bubbling in that tank, she was the Empress consort, a diplomat, a VIP. The moment he flatlined, she was loose cargo. So she started fighting back the only way she knew how, by being annoying. She made friends with the cleaning staff, a species of six-legged furry creatures who communicated in chirps. She learned their names, asked about their families, and helped them carry laundry baskets when the guards weren't looking. It horrified the nobles, but it meant the staff whispered things to her. Gossip, schedules, which corridors to avoid. She talked to the drones. "Hey, Bob," she said one evening, poking the floating sphere while she paced her room. "You think Malik dyes his skin? He looks a little too blue, right? Like he fell in a vat of industrial coolant." The drone beeped impassively. "I agree," Leora said. "And Saris? I bet she eats live rodents. I saw the way she looked at that appetizers tray." She was lonely. It was a crushing, hollow ache that hit her at night when the lights dimmed and the palace went quiet. She would lie in the massive, shifting bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Taran finished his toy, or if her mother was sleeping better now that the debt collectors were gone. One night, the loneliness was interrupted. Leora was sitting on the floor trying to hack the lock on her window to get some fresh air, when the air in the center of her room shimmered. A column of static rose from the floor, coalescing into a hooded figure. It was a hologram, but not like the pristine, high-definition displays of the palace. This one was grainy, shadowed, the edges fraying into digital noise. The figure was cloaked in darkness, face obscured by a digital blur. "Consort Haze," a voice spoke. It was deep, distorted by a synthesizer, layering 3 different octaves on top of each other. Leora scrambled back, grabbing a heavy statuette of a 3-headed avian beast from the nightstand. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The figure did not move. "Access to the internal grid is a hobby. I have been watching you." "Creepy," Leora snapped, hefting the statue. "Is this Malik? Sending a spook to scare the human girl? Tell him I'm not buying whatever he's selling." "It is not Malik," the voice said. There was a pause, as if the person on the other end was amused. "You speak to the maintenance drones. You carry laundry for the scullery workers. You insult the regent to an inanimate sphere named Bob. He listens better than the council," Leora said, lowering the statue slightly. "What do you want?" "I want to know what you want," the shadow said. "You are the key to a very delicate lock. Leora Hayes. The Empire believes you are a scared child. Malik believes you are a pawn. Saris believes you are a nuisance. Who are you? Really?" Leora stood up. She felt a strange thrill of danger. This wasn't a courtier, and this felt illicit. "I am the girl who got sold," she said flatly. "I am the transaction." "And if the Emperor dies?" the shadow asked. "What happens to the transaction? Then I get shipped off to a moon to rot, or I get spaced out of an airlock because I know too much," Leora said. She stepped closer to the hologram. "Why do you care?" "Because," the shadow replied, the distortion in the voice smoothing out just a fraction. "There are rumors. Rumors that you are not just a random selection, that you are an experiment. If the human consort can hold the throne, perhaps humans deserve a seat at the table. If you fail, the outer fringe burns." Leora felt a cold sweat prickle her neck. No pressure. Then, "What is your ambition?" the voice pressed. "Do you want gold? Power? A fleet of your own?" I want my brother to grow up without coughing up red dust, Leora said, her voice fierce and quiet. I want my mother to sleep through the night. I want to go one day without someone telling me I am dirt because I was born on the wrong planet. I want freedom. Real freedom. Not this gilded cage. There was a long silence. The static of the hologram hissed softly. Freedom is expensive, the shadow said finally. It costs more than debt. It costs blood. I have already paid in blood, Leora said, holding up her wrist where the biotech circlet still glowed, fused to her skin. This thing feeds on me. I am literally keeping your vegetable emperor warm. The shadow seemed to shift, the hooded head tilting. Vegetable. You have a colorful vocabulary. I call it like I see it. Sleep well. Leora Hayes, the figure said. The test has begun. Wait, Leora shouted, reaching out. The hologram vanished, leaving her standing alone in the dark. But the room felt different, charged. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the palace tightened like a bowstring. The test the shadow mentioned seemed to be happening to the palace itself. Systems began to glitch around Leora. It started small. She would get angry at Zal during a lesson, and the lights in the library would flare so bright they blew out the sensors. She would feel a spike of anxiety about her family, and the heavy blast-proof doors of her suite would unlock and slide open on their own. Technicians scurried through the halls, scanning the walls and muttering. Resonance spikes. She heard one whisper. The bio-neural grid is reacting to a foreign input. She is compatible, another murmured. Look at the readings. The ship's heart beats in sync with hers. Leora tried to ignore it, writing it off as faulty alien junk, but she couldn't ignore the heat in her wrist. The circlet was getting warmer. It pulsed when she was angry. It throbbed when she was afraid. And then came the council meeting. Leora was not invited, of course. She was supposed to be in flower arranging class, learning to arrange carnivorous orchids that tried to bite her thumbs. But she had slipped away, using a maintenance shaft the cleaning staff had shown her, to get to the observation gallery above the high council chamber. Below, in a circular pit of floating podiums, the Regency Council was in session. Malik stood in the center, his voice projecting clearly to the gallery. It has been 6 months, he declared, spreading his blue hands. The bio readings are stagnant. The Emperor is not recovering. We are pouring the Empire's energy reserves into a vessel that has a leak. It is time to discuss the compassionate protocol. A murmur went through the room. Compassionate protocol, Leora whispered to herself. That sounded like a euphemism for murder. We must disconnect the stasis support, Malik continued. Allow his spirit to rejoin the cosmos. It is cruel to keep him trapped in this half-life. And the human bride. She is a reminder of a failed hope. We will dissolve the union, send her home with a generous pension, and establish a permanent stewardship. Send her home. Leora's heart hammered. If they sent her home now, the protection deal was void. The debt would come back. The Empire would burn Colony 9 just to tidy up the paperwork. And they were going to kill him? Just unplug him like a broken toaster. Rage, hot and white, flooded her chest. The circlet on her wrist flared, searing her skin. Above her, the lights in the gallery exploded. Glass rained down. The council members ducked. Leora didn't think. She kicked open the access door and stormed out onto the balcony overlooking the chamber. You will not touch him, she screamed. The entire council froze. 300 alien nobles looked up. Malik's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing. Consort Hayes, he said, his voice dripping with venom. You are interrupting state business. I am interrupting an execution, Leora yelled, Her voice was amplified by the acoustics, booming through the hall. You talk about mercy, you talk about compassion, you just want his chair. Guards! Lady Saris shrieked, pointing a claw. Remove the creature, I am his wife, Leora shouted, gripping the railing. The biotech circlet was glowing so bright it cast a violet light over her face. As long as I am breathing, and as long as I am linked to him, he is the Emperor. You unplug him. You have to unplug me, and I do not disconnect easily. She glared at Malik. I will not be made a widow for your convenience. Regent, if he dies because nature took him, not because you wanted a promotion. The silence that followed was deafening. Malik stared at her. For the first time, the oily smile was gone. He looked unsettled. He looked at her glowing wrist, then at the flickering lights of the chamber. Remove her, he said quietly. Guards seized her arms. Leora didn't fight. She had said her piece. She let them drag her out, but she kept her head high, staring Malik down until the doors slid shut. By evening, the footage was everywhere. The holonet was buzzing. The defiant bride. The human who roared. Leora sat in her room, shaking. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving her nauseous. What had she done? She had painted a target on her back the size of a moon. The shadow voice had asked what she wanted. She had wanted to protect her family. Well, she had just gambled everything on a coma patient. She lay down, exhausted. The palace grew quiet. Then, the siren screamed. It was not a normal alarm. It was a sound that vibrated in the bone, a low, dissonant wail that signaled catastrophic failure. The lights in her room turned blood red. Alert! The room's AI announced, stasis chamber integrity critical. Biofield collapse imminent. Evacuate Sector 4. Sector 4. That was the Great Hall. The Emperor. Leora sat up. Accident, she thought. They didn't wait for a vote. They rigged an accident. She should stay put. She should let it happen. If he died now, it wasn't her fault. Maybe she could still negotiate a way home. But the circlet on her wrist screamed. It wasn't sound. It was heat. It was a physical yank, a magnetic pull so strong it dragged her arm forward. She felt a wave of panic that wasn't hers. It was raw, primal fear, flooding into her mind through the link. He was dying. He was suffocating. Leora didn't decide to run. Her body decided for her. She sprinted out of the room. The guards were gone, likely evacuating. The corridors were chaos. The palace was alive, and it was in pain. The walls were spasming, the bioluminescence flickering stroboscopic red. Corridors twisted, blocking paths. Get out of my way. Leora screamed at a wall of shifting muscle fiber. The wall shuddered. It recognized her. Or it recognized the authority of the circlet burning on her wrist. The fibers tore open, creating a passage. She ran. She slid under closing blast doors. She vaulted over panicked service droids. The pull on her wrist was a compass, dragging her down, toward the heart of the palace. She burst into the Great Hall. It was a scene of devastation. Energy arcs, thick as tree trunks, were whipping around the stasis chamber. The golden glass was cracking. The amber fluid was boiling. Technicians were running away. The containment field was failing. Leora! She turned. It was Zal, hovering behind a shield partition. Go back! The core is overloading. It will vaporize you. He's in there, Leora shouted, shielding her eyes from the blinding light. She ran toward the dais. The heat was intense, singeing the edges of her hair. The energy arcs lashed out, striking the floor inches from her boots, melting the stone. She reached the tank. The Emperor was thrashing inside. The tubes were ripping free. His mouth was open in a silent scream. The stasis fluid was turning murky, dark with discharge. The console was a mess of sparking alien glyphs. Leora didn't know how to read it. She didn't know the code, but the circlet knew. The device on her wrist was vibrating so hard her bones rattled. It was trying to connect. It needed a terminal. She saw the manual override, a handprint scanner on the glass of the tank itself, glowing faintly amidst the chaos. Leora lunged. She slammed her hand, the one with the circlet, flat against the boiling glass of the stasis chamber. Connect. The world turned white. A shockwave of pure energy blasted outward from her palm. It didn't throw her back, it went through her. Leora screamed, her back arching. She felt her mind being torn open. She wasn't Leora Hayes anymore. She was a conduit. She was a wire carrying the voltage of a star. Data flooded her brain, not numbers, but sensations, suffocation, betrayal, poison, override, stabilize, live. The circlet fused with the tank's systems. The resonance the technicians had whispered about became a roar. Leora's biology, compatible in a way that defied probability, acted as the grounding rod for the overloading system. She pushed back. She poured every ounce of her stubborn, angry survivalist will into the machine. "You don't get to die," she thought screamingly at the man in the tank. "I bought you. You are mine. Live! Damn you!" The energy arc snapped back. The boiling fluid stilled. The red lights turned a blinding, serene blue. The system rebooted. Silence crashed back into the hall. Leora stood there, her hands still pressed to the glass, smoking. Her knees gave out. She slid down the side of the tank, gasping for air that tasted of ozone and burnt hair. She blinked, her vision swimming. She looked up at the glass. The fluid was clearing. The figure inside was settling. But for 1 second, one impossible, hallucinated second, the masking field of the stasis chamber flickered and failed. The withered gray corpse was gone. In its place floated a man, a young man. His skin was not gray, but a pale, luminous obsidian, etched with silver markings that glowed with vitality. His chest was broad, muscled, rising and falling in a strong rhythm. His hair floated in the liquid, dark as the void, and his eyes were open. They were violet, electric, burning violet, the same eyes from her dream, the same eyes from the shadow. They were looking directly at her. He wasn't dying. He was powerful. He was beautiful. And he was furious. Then the stasis field hummed, and the illusion, or the truth, was masked again. The image warped, twisting back into the frail, elderly figure of the dying emperor. Leora slumped to the floor. Her wrist was throbbing. Her heart was racing so fast it hurt. "Compatible," a voice whispered nearby. It might have been Zal. It might have been Malik. Leora couldn't turn her head. Darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. "He's young," she thought, the realization floating in her mind like a piece of drift wreckage. "He's handsome." The courtier's joke. It hadn't been a joke. She tried to speak, to warn someone, or maybe to curse him for lying to her, but her tongue was heavy. As she slipped into unconsciousness, she felt a lingering sensation on her skin. It wasn't the heat of the fire. It was the ghost of a touch, a sensation of gratitude and something else, something hot and magnetic, curiosity. Leora closed her eyes, and the darkness took her. The silence in the consort wing was usually heavy, a suffocating blanket of isolation that smelled of ozone and alien flowers. But tonight, the silence felt different. It felt like the holding of breath. Leora Hayes paced the length of her quarters. Her boots, scuffed and out of place on the polished obsidian floor, made a sharp, rhythmic clicking sound. It had been 2 days since the incident in the Great Hall. 2 days since she had slammed her hand onto a boiling stasis tank and acted as a living jumper cable for an empire's dying sun. Since then, the palace had gone into lockdown. Zal, her mantis-like tutor, had vanished. The drones, Buzzy, Snitch, Creeper, and Bob, hovered near the ceiling, their optical sensors retracted, dormant. Leora rubbed her wrist. The biotech circlet was cool now, the metal dull against her skin. But the memory of the heat lingered. She could still feel the phantom surge of energy, the roar of a mind that was not hers flooding her synapses. "He saw me," she whispered to the empty room. She knew she sounded crazy. The official report broadcast on every holoscreen in the palace claimed that a reactor surge had caused a hallucination-inducing field leakage. They said the Emperor was stable, still in his coma, still the withered gray husk she had married. But she remembered the eyes, violet, burning, alive. She stopped pacing and looked at her reflection in the dark window. The living dress shifted around her, turning a dark, moody blue to match her anxiety. If he is awake, she thought, gripping the window ledge, then he is the cruelest bastard in the galaxy. Watching me, letting me think I am married to a corpse while he floats in there and... What? Laughs? The lights went out. It was not a flicker. It was an instant, absolute plunge into darkness. The ambient bioluminescence in the walls died. The hum of the gravity stabilizers cut out, leaving the air feeling suddenly thin and weightless. Leora spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Hello?" she called out. "Bob? Anyone?" The door to her suite, a slab of blast-proof organic metal that usually required a DNA scan to open, hissed. The manual override gears ground together, metal shrieking against metal, and the heavy door slid open. A figure stood in the doorway. He was backlit by the emergency strobe lights flashing in the corridor. A silhouette carved from shadow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and he moved with a fluid, predatory grace that made Leora's instincts scream danger. She grabbed the only weapon she had, a heavy crystalline vase filled with glowing blue moss, and held it up. "Stay back," she warned. "I do not care what species you are, I will crack your skull." The figure stepped into the room. As he crossed the threshold, the emergency reserve power for her suite kicked in. A dim, amber light washed over him. Leora dropped the vase. It shattered, sending blue moss and crystal shards skittering across the floor. It was him. He was not floating in a tank. He was not gray. He was not old. The man standing before her was perhaps 25 standard years old. His skin was the color of polished obsidian, smooth and flawless, etched with faint silver markings that swirled down his neck and disappeared beneath the collar of his black tactical suit. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was devastatingly unfairly sharp. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and lips pressed into a tight line. And the eyes. Those violet, electric eyes were locked on hers, blazing with an intensity that made the air between them crackle. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and he was the man she had been told was a vegetable. "Leora?" His voice was deep, resonant, stripped of the distortion she had heard from the hologram. Leora stared at him. The shock paralyzed her for exactly 3 seconds. Then the rage hit. "You!" She breathed. She marched across the room. She did not think about protocol. She did not think about the fact that he was the Galactic Emperor and she was a debt-ridden farm girl. She thought only of the fear, the humiliation, the nights she had cried herself to sleep thinking she was alone. She shoved him. She slammed both hands into his chest with all the force she had acquired hauling water tanks on Colony 9. "You liar!" she screamed. He stumbled back a step. clearly surprised by the assault. You let me think you were dying. She shoved him again, harder this time. You let me stand there at that altar and marry a corpse. You let them mock me. Leora, listen, he started, raising his hands. No, you listen. She swung at him, a clumsy, furious strike aimed at his perfect face. I have been terrified. I have been mourning you. I thought I was being sold to a crypt keeper, and you were… What? Watching on a monitor? Eating popcorn? He caught her wrists. His reflexes were a blur. One moment her hands were flying, the next they were pinned in his grip. His skin was warm, his fingers strong but not painful. He pulled her close, stopping her assault, forcing her to look up at him. They stood chest to chest in the dim amber light, both breathing hard. The proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of ozone, static, and something distinctly masculine, wood smoke and rain. I was not eating popcorn, he said, his voice low and intense. I was trying to stay alive. Leora glared at him, her chest heaving against his. She tried to yank her hands free, but he held fast. Let me go, she hissed. Not until you stop trying to commit regicide, he replied. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Amusement? Admiration? Why? She demanded, her voice cracking. Why the act? Why the tank? Because if I step out of that tank before I am ready, I am a dead man, he said, his expression hardening. And so are you. He released her wrists slowly, as if testing whether she would attack again. Leora stepped back, rubbing her arms, her skin tingling where he had touched her. She felt a jolt of attraction so sharp it made her knees weak, which only made her angrier. Explain, she ordered, crossing her arms. And it better be good, Kale Draven, Emperor of the Thousand Systems, sighed. He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly tired, the regal mask slipping to reveal the exhausted young man beneath. The assassination attempt 6 months ago was not a separatist strike, he said, pacing to the window where she had been standing. It was poison, a neural toxin administered by my own personal physician. It was meant to scramble my brain, leave me pliable, a puppet for the Regency Council. Malik, Leora said. The name tasted like ash. Malik, Kale confirmed, and Saris, and half the High Command. They realized that a dead martyr is useful, but a brain-dead emperor is even better. They could rule through me indefinitely. So you played along, Leora realized. I had to. The toxin nearly killed me. I needed the stasis tank to filter it from my blood, but once I woke up, I realized that if I showed signs of recovery, they would just finish the job. So I stayed under. I let them believe I was fading. And the bride? Leora asked, her voice quiet. Where do I fit in? A human girl from the dirt farms? Was I just a distraction? Kyle turned to face her. His violet eyes softened. I needed an outsider. Leora, the court is a viper pit. Everyone is bought. Everyone is compromised. I needed someone with no ties to the core worlds. Someone who could not be bribed with titles they already had. So you bought me instead, she said bitterly. I offered a contract, he corrected gently. I did not expect you to accept, and I certainly did not expect you to be… You… Me? Leora laughed dryly. You mean loud? Abrasive? I mean brave, Kale said. He stepped closer, the bioluminescent patterns on his skin pulsing faintly. I watched you. Leora, I saw you stand up to Malik in the council chamber. I saw you befriend the cleaning staff. I saw you risk your life to reboot my stasis field when you could have just run away. He stopped 2 feet from her. I did not expect to find an ally, he whispered. I definitely did not expect to find a wife. Leora looked away, her face heating up. "Do not call me that. It is what you are. It is a sham. You are the Emperor. I am a peace offering. Is that all?" Leora looked back at him. The air between them was heavy, charged with the same electricity that had surged through the link. She looked at his lips, full, sculpted, and wondered what they would feel like. She shoved the thought down. "Prove it," she said. "Prove to me that this is necessary. Prove that you are not just using me like everyone else." Kale nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a data crystal. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "To the dark." He led her not out the door, but to a section of the wall covered in a tapestry. He pressed his palm against a hidden sensor, and the wall dissolved, revealing a narrow, unlit service corridor. They walked in silence, Kale leading, Leora following. She watched the way he moved, silent, efficient. He was a soldier, she realized, not just a ruler. He moved like someone who knew how to kill. They emerged into a small, cramped room deep in the bowels of the palace. It was filled with screens, humming servers, and wires. It looked less like a royal chamber and more like a hacker's den. Kale plugged the crystal into a terminal. A holographic map of the galaxy sprang up. It was covered in red markers. "This is what I have been doing while floating in the amber," Kale said, pointing to the red zones. "These are encrypted communications I intercepted from Malik's private server." Leora leaned in. The text was in High Imperial, but the translation software scrolled beneath it. Subject: Resource Allocation, Sector 9. From Regent Malik. To Warlord Vrax. Message: The human problem will be solved upon the Emperor's termination. The peace treaty is void. You are granted harvesting rights for the Rim colonies. Labor force acquisition approved. Estimated yield: 500 million units. Leora felt the blood drain from her face. "Units," she whispered. "He means people. He means slaves," Kale said, his voice hard as iron. "Malik is selling the outer fringe to pay off his debts to the warlords. If I die, or if the Regency stays in power, your world and 100 others will be stripped for parts." Leora stared at the map. She saw the dot that represented Colony 9. She thought of Taryn. She thought of her mother. "They are going to enslave us." "Yes," Kale said, "unless we stop them." Leora looked up at him. Her anger was still there, but it was changing shape. It was no longer directed at him. It was a cold, sharp weapon she could use. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Kale looked surprised. "You believe me? Just like that?" "I believe that Malik is a slime mold in a silk robe," Leora said. "And I believe that you are the only thing standing between my brother and a labor camp. So yes, I am in." Kale let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. "Thank you." He reached out and, with a hesitation that was surprisingly endearing, brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His fingers lingered on her temple. "You saved my life in the Great Hall." "Leora," he said softly, "I never got to thank you for that." Leora froze. His touch was electric. Her heart did a traitorous flip in her chest. They were close again, the blue light of the hologram casting shadows across his face. He looked at her lips, his gaze dropping, then back up to her eyes. He leaned in, just an inch. Leora's breath hitched. She wanted him to close the gap. She wanted to know if he tasted like the storm he smelled like. She pulled back. She stepped away, her back hitting the console. "Whoa," she said, her voice shaky. "Halt. Brakes." Kale blinked, stepping back immediately, his hands raised in surrender. "I apologize. I misread the signal." "You misread nothing. Leora thought. Aloud, she said, "You are handsome. Kyle, I will give you that. You are objectively annoyingly handsome. You look like a statue that learned how to brood." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Thank you. But," Leora continued, pointing a finger at him, "you are also a liar. A really good one. And I do not fall for liars. Even the ones with glowing tattoos and jawlines that could cut glass." Kyle touched his jaw, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Is the jawline really that sharp?" "It is ridiculous," Leora said, crossing her arms to hide the fact that her hands were trembling. "And the tattoos? Do they come with a dimmer switch? Or do you just glow in the dark like a deep-sea squid?" "They are bioluminescent neural interfaces," he said, looking amused. "And yes, I can dim them. But I usually do not have to hide in closets with my wife." "Fake wife," Leora corrected. Kyle's smile faded, replaced by a serious intensity. "That is the deal. Then," he said, "in public, we are the tragic couple. You are the grieving consort. I am the dying invalid. We maintain the distance. We give them no reason to suspect I am awake." "And in private?" Leora asked. "In private, we work," Kyle said. "We hunt. We find the evidence to bury Malik before he buries us." "Deal," Leora said. She held out her hand. Kyle took it. His grip was firm, warm, and solid. It felt like a promise. "But there is one more thing," Kyle said, not letting go of her hand. "What?" "The surge in the Great Hall," he said. "When you touched the tank. That should not have been possible. Leora, even with the interface circlet, a human nervous system should have burned out. The voltage required to reboot the core, it kills seasoned alien engineers." Leora shrugged, trying to pull her hand away, but he held on. "I am tough. I drink unfiltered colony water." "It is not about toughness," Kyle said. "It is about genetics." He turned and led her deeper into the hidden lair, to a medical scanning bay. "Sit," he ordered. Leora sat on the edge of the diagnostic bed. Kyle tapped a few commands and a laser grid swept over her body. Data scrolled across the screen. Kyle watched it, his brow furrowed. "Just as I suspected," he murmured. "What?" Leora asked. "Do I have a parasite?" "You have markers," Kyle said, turning the screen toward her. "Look at this sequence. Here and here." Leora squinted at the DNA helix. "I failed biology." "Kale, it looks like a twisted ladder." "These markers," Kale explained, his voice filled with wonder, "are ancient. They date back to the first era of the Empire. We thought this bloodline was extinct, so what are you saying? That I am an alien?" "No," Kale said. "You are human, but thousands of years ago, the Empire seeded genetic material into certain colony worlds. Dormant traits, designed to surface in times of crisis." He looked at her with a new kind of intensity. Not romantic, but reverent. "You are a resonant conduit, Leora." "That sounds like a plumbing part," she quipped. "It means your nervous system is capable of interfacing directly with Imperial technology on a fundamental level. You do not just use the tech, you feel it. You can speak to the ships. You can speak to the gates." He paused. "You can speak to me." Leora rubbed her arms. The spooky feeling was back. "Okay," she said. "So I am a human Wi-Fi router. What does that mean for us?" "It means we can do something Malik never expects," Kale said. He reached into a drawer and pulled out two new devices. They looked like the circlet she wore, but thinner, made of silver filigree. "Neural synchronizers," he said. He handed one to her. "Put it on your temple." Leora hesitated, then placed the silver device against her skin. It stuck instantly, humming with a cool vibration. Kyle placed the other one on his own temple. "We are going to run a simulation," he said. "I need to know how strong your resonance is. We are going to pilot the wormhole gate. From here, from inside our minds." He sat on the bed beside her, close but not touching. "Close your eyes, Leora, and do not fight it." Leora closed her eyes. At first, there was only darkness. Then, she felt Kale. It was not like a voice in her ear. It was a presence in the center of her chest. It was the smell of rain, the feeling of cold steel, the weight of a crown. "Open your eyes," his thought echoed in her mind. She opened them. They were not in the room. They were floating in the void of space around them. The stars burned with a brilliance that hurt. Ahead of them was a ring of swirling light, a wormhole gate, massive and terrifying. "You are the pilot," Kyle's voice whispered, wrapping around her consciousness like smoke. "Guide us through." Leora reached out, not with her hands, but with her will. She felt the ship around her. She was the ship. She felt the engines as her own heartbeat. She felt the sensors as her own skin, and she felt Kale. He was the navigator. He was the map. They moved forward. The sensation was indescribable. It was intimate in a way that made sex seem distant. Their minds were woven together. She felt his fear, a sharp, cold spike of terror that he kept hidden behind his stoic mask. He was terrified of failing. He was terrified of being the last Draven. He was terrified of being alone. And he felt her. She felt him brush against her memories, the dust of the colony, the hunger, the shame of standing on that auction block, being sold like meat, the deep, buried belief that she was worthless, that she was just a girl from nowhere. "You are not worthless," Kale's thought slammed into her, fierce and hot. "You are burning bright. Leora, you are a sun. You are lonely." She projected back, overwhelmed by the depth of his isolation. "God, Kale, you are so lonely." They hit the wormhole event horizon. The world dissolved into color and light. Leora gasped in the real world, her hand blindly seeking his. He grabbed her hand. In the simulation, they were flying in perfect synchronization. They were one entity, two halves of a whole. The resonance sang between them, a harmony that stabilized the chaotic energies of the wormhole. It was euphoria. It was belonging. Then, the simulation ended. The darkness of the room rushed back. Leora ripped the device from her temple, gasping for air as if she had been underwater. She was crying. She hadn't realized it. Tears were streaming down her face. Kyle was breathing hard, his hand still gripping hers so tight her knuckles were white. He looked at her, his violet eyes wide, stripped of all defenses. He looked shaken to his core. He had felt it too. The connection. The undeniable, terrifying rightness of it. "That," Kyle whispered, his voice trembling. "That was a 100% resonance rating." Leora wiped her face with her free hand. She pulled her other hand away from his, needing the distance. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. She stood up, her legs wobbly. "I think you should go," she said. Her voice was a whisper. "Leora, please, Kale, just go. I can't. Not right now." Kale stood up slowly. He looked at her for a long moment, a mixture of longing and respect on his face. "We start tomorrow," he said softly. "The plan." "The plan," Leora repeated numbly. He walked to the hidden door. Before he stepped into the shadows, he looked back. "Sleep well, wife." The door slid shut, the wall sealing up as if he had never been there. Leora stood in the darkness. She touched her temple where the device had been. She touched her hand where he had held it. She sank onto the bed, pulling the living silk sheets up to her chin. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the palace. She was supposed to hate him. He was the symbol of everything that oppressed her world. He was a liar. He was dangerous. But as she closed her eyes, she could still feel the echo of his mind against hers. She could feel the warmth of his admiration. She could feel the hunger in his touch. "I am in so much trouble," she whispered to the empty room. She wanted freedom. She wanted to save her family. But as the image of Kale's violet eyes burned in her memory, she admitted the terrifying truth to herself. She had never wanted anything, or anyone, as dangerously as she was starting to want her dying alien husband. The gilded cage of the imperial palace had stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like a slaughterhouse. Leora Hayes stood by the translucent wall of her quarters, watching the orbital traffic lanes above the capital city. Usually the sky was a synchronized ballet of sleek yachts and patrol drones. Today, it was clogged with heavy cruisers. The blockade formation was unmistakable. Even to a farm girl from the fringes, "They know," she whispered. Behind her, the hidden panel in the wall slid open with a hiss. Kale stepped out. He was not wearing his emperor's robes, nor the tactical suit he had worn the night he revealed himself. He was dressed in the rough, grease-stained flight leathers of a lower-deck mechanic. "They are moving up the timeline," Kale said, his voice tight. Leora turned. "What happened?" "Regent Malik just announced a system-wide broadcast for tomorrow morning," Kale replied, tossing a travel pack onto her bed. "It is titled The Ascension Ritual." Leora felt the blood drain from her face. Ascension. That is the polite word for pulling the plug. Kale finished grimly. "They are going to announce that my condition has deteriorated beyond hope. They will disconnect the stasis field on live holonet. I will be declared dead. Malik will assume the throne as eternal steward. And you." "I become the tragic widow of peace," Leora guessed, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. "A prop to cry at the funeral and then disappear quietly into an airlock accident a week later." "Precisely," Kyle said. He looked at her, his violet eyes burning with urgency. "We have to leave. Now." "How?" Leora asked, gesturing at the window. "The palace is locked down. There are cruisers in the sky. If we try to take a shuttle, we will be vaporized before we clear the atmosphere." "We are not taking a shuttle," Kyle said. "We are taking out the trash." 20 minutes later, Leora found herself deep in the subterranean service levels of the palace, a place where the pristine bioarchitecture gave way to dripping pipes and the smell of fermenting waste. She was running to keep up with Kale and a tall, broad-shouldered woman with a scar running through one eyebrow. This was Commander Ryan, the only member of the Royal Guard Kale still trusted. "Here she is," Ryan said, stopping before a blast door. "The Void Rat." Leora looked at the ship. It was ugly. It was a lumpy, asymmetrical hulk of rusted metal and patched hull plating, shaped vaguely like a tick. It smelled of rotting organic matter and engine coolant. "You are joking," Leora said, staring at the vessel. "It is a waste hauler," Ryan explained, keying in the launch sequence on a data pad. "Automated clearance code Gamma 9. It is programmed to dump palace bio-waste into the local sun. No one scans the garbage scows. So we are escaping a palace just to live in a flying trash can," Leora muttered. "Climbing the ramp. Fantastic. If I die in this thing. Kyle, I am going to haunt you. If you die, I will be dead too. So you can yell at me in person." Kyle shot back, following her up. Rian stayed on the platform. Go, my liege. I will scramble the sensor logs. Do not come back until you have the hammer to crush them. Kale clasped Rian's arm, a warrior's handshake. Stay alive. Ryan! The ramp hissed shut, sealing them in. The interior of the void rat was cramped, utilitarian, and covered in grime. Kyle slid into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the manual controls. These were not the sleek neural interfaces of the Royal Fleet. These were heavy switches and rusted levers. Strap in, Kale ordered. This is going to be rough. Leora buckled herself into the co-pilot's chair. Why? It is just a garbage run, right? Kale punched the ignition. The ship shuddered violently, the engines coughing before roaring to life. Because Malik is paranoid, Kale said. He has set the perimeter defenses to auto-target any unscheduled mass leaving the gravity well. Even the trash. The ship lurched upward. Leora's stomach dropped. On the view screen, the dark underbelly of the palace fell away, replaced by the blinding lights of the orbital defense grid. Alert! The ship's computer droned in a bored, mechanical voice. Lock-on detected and plasma batteries tracking. Hold on, Kale yelled. He slammed the throttle forward. The void rat screamed, its engines pushing against the atmospheric drag. Outside, the sky turned into a light show of deadly proportions. Green bolts of plasma streaked past the cockpit, sizzling against the shields. The ship shook as a glancing blow hit the port stabilizer. They are not just scanning, Leora shouted over the roar. They are firing. Kale gritted his teeth, wrestling with the yoke. I need to get us to the wormhole gate. It is the only way out of the sector. The wormhole? Leora looked at the nav computer. The gate was destabilized. Malik had messed with the calibration to prevent unauthorized travel. That is suicide. It is our only chance, Kale yelled. Interface with me. Leora, I cannot fly this brick and calculate the quantum shear at the same time. Leora didn't hesitate. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the silver neural synchronizer, and slapped it onto her temple. Kyle did the same. Connect. The world snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. Leora was no longer just sitting in a dirty chair. She was the ship. She felt the heat of the plasma bolts on her skin. She felt the groan of the metal struts. And she felt Kale, his focus, his fear, his lightning-fast calculations. I have the helm, his thought echoed in her mind. You take the sensors. Find me a path. They hit the atmosphere's edge and punched into the vacuum. The wormhole gate loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of unstable violet energy, crackling with lightning. It looked like a storm that wanted to eat them. It is closing, Leora projected. The aperture is fluctuating. We are going through. Kale pushed back. The void rat dove into the chaos, inside the wormhole. Physics broke down. Colors screamed. Gravity pulled in 3 directions at once. The ship began to rattle, the hull groaning under the tidal forces. Kyle was struggling. Leora could feel his mind straining to hold the ship steady against the chaotic currents of subspace. He was flying on logic, trying to calculate vectors, but the math was changing every millisecond. We are going to dissolve, Leora realized. He cannot see the pattern, but she could. It was the resonance. The ancient genetic markers in her blood flared hot. Where Kale saw chaotic data, Leora saw threads. She saw glowing golden strands weaving through the violet storm, paths of stability, currents in the river. No, she thought, her mind overriding his panic. Not left. There. Leora grabbed the controls not with her hands, but with her mind. She yanked the void rat into a hard starboard roll, diving deeper into the turbulence. Leora. Kale's thought was a warning. That is into the shear. Trust me, she screamed back across the link. She guided them onto a thin thread of golden light. The turbulence vanished instantly. The ship sleeked forward, riding the current of stability like a surfer on a wave. She felt Kale's shock, then his awe, as he realized what she was doing. She was navigating chaos by feel. They burst out the other side. The violet storm vanished, replaced by the quiet, star-strewn darkness of the fringe. The link snapped off. Leora slumped in her chair, gasping for air. Her nose was bleeding. Kyle sat frozen for a moment, his hands still gripping the yoke. Then he turned to her. "You saw it," he breathed. "You saw the flow. I saw threads," Leora rasped, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "Is that normal?" "No," Kale said, a grin breaking through his exhaustion. "That is impossible." He looked at the view screen. Ahead of them, floating in a nebula of orange gas, was a station that looked like it had been built by welding 50 different shipwrecks together. It was ugly, jagged, and bristling with illegal antennas. "Port Sunder," Kyle said, "the end of the line." They docked at the station, blending in with a queue of other battered freighters. Port Sunder was everything the imperial capital was not. It was dirty, loud, and smelled of recirculated air and frying spices. Neon signs in a dozen languages flickered on the walls, advertising everything from spare parts to no-questions-asked medical services. But as they walked through the crowded market, Leora felt a strange lightness in her chest. No one was looking at her. No one cared about her posture. She was just another drifter in a leather jacket. "It is disgusting," Leora said, stepping over a puddle of questionable blue liquid. "I love it." "Keep your head down," Kyle murmured, pulling his collar up. "We are traders. My name is Kian. You are—" "Leo," she said. "Just Leo." They found a room in a boarding house that catered to smugglers. The proprietor, a four-eyed alien with a cigar stuck in one mouth, took Kale's credits and tossed them a key card. "Room block 4. No loud noises. If you kill each other, clean up the blood." The room was the size of a closet. It had a single viewport looking out at a brick wall, a malfunctioning sanitizer unit, and one bed. Leora stared at the bed. It was a mimic mattress, a slab of semi-sentient gel that was supposed to mold to the sleeper. It looked small, very small. "You take the floor?" Leora suggested. Kyle looked at the floor, which was made of metal grating. "I am the Emperor." "You are Kian the Trader," Leora reminded him, dropping her pack. "And Kian the Trader is a gentleman." "I am an injured gentleman," Kyle countered, rubbing his shoulder where the harness had dug in during the flight. They compromised. They would share. Leora lay on the left side, pressed against the cold wall. Kale lay on the right, hanging off the edge. "Good night, Your Majesty," Leora muttered, turning her back to him. "Good night." "Leora," he replied. 10 minutes later, the mimic mattress betrayed them. Sensing 2 heat sources, the gel decided to maximize thermal efficiency. It began to contract, knitting itself tighter, pushing the 2 heavy bodies toward the center. Leora woke up an hour later. The ship, or the station, was undergoing turbulence. The room shook. She was not against the wall anymore. She was pressed flush against Kale. Her back was against his chest. His arm was draped over her waist, his face buried in the crook of her neck. She froze. He was warm, incredibly warm. She could feel the slow, strong beat of his heart against her spine. His breath ghosted over her skin, sending shivers down her arms. The station shuddered again, throwing them even closer, their legs tangled. Kyle stirred. He didn't pull away. His hand, resting on her stomach, shifted, sliding up to rest lightly on her ribcage. His thumb brushed the underside of her breast, accidental, but electric. Leora's breath hitched. Kale went still. "He was awake," Leora, he whispered, his voice rough with sleep. Yeah? She breathed. The mattress, he muttered. It is shrinking. I noticed. Neither of them moved. The logical thing to do was to shove him off, to make a joke, to diffuse the tension. But Leora didn't want to move. She wanted to turn around. She wanted to bury her hands in his hair. Cale's hand on her ribs tightened slightly. He shifted, his body pressing harder against hers. The friction of the leather and the heat of their skin created a friction that was maddening. Cale, she whispered. I am trying. Leora, he murmured into her hair. I am trying very hard to be a gentleman. Why? The word slipped out before she could stop it. Because, he said, his hand tracing the line of her spine, stopping just above her hip. You are under my protection, and I will not. I cannot touch you like this. Unless you truly want it. Unless it is your choice, not just proximity. Leora's heart hammered. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to turn around and kiss him until they both forgot about Malik and the Empire. But the words stuck. She was scared. Scared of what it meant. Scared that if she gave in to this, she would lose the last piece of herself that was just Leora. The moment stretched, crackling with unspent energy. It was a wire pulled tight, humming, ready to snap. Then the station stabilizers kicked in with a loud clang. The shaking stopped. Kyle exhaled a long, shaky breath. He slowly, deliberately removed his arm and rolled away, hanging off the edge of the mattress again. Go to sleep. Leo, he said, his voice strained. Leora lay there in the dark, her body aching with a frustration so sharp it felt like a bruise. Okay, she whispered. They didn't sleep much. The next morning they went to work. Port Sunder was a hive of information if you knew where to look. They spent the day trawling the data markets and the dark bars where spacers traded secrets. They needed proof. The intercepted messages Cale had found in the palace were damaging, but they were encrypted fragments. They needed a witness. Leora's ability to talk to anyone came in handy, while Kyle stood in the shadows, looking intimidating. Leora charmed a gossip-peddling bartender with jokes about bad water filters. She learned about a former Imperial engineer who was hiding out in the lower levels, terrified of his own shadow. They found him in a maintenance closet, huddled behind a stack of power cells. He was a Talaran, a mole-like species with thick glasses and trembling hands. Go away, the engineer squeaked, brandishing a wrench. I know nothing. I saw nothing. Engineer Hacks? Cale stepped forward, his voice commanding. I am a traitor, Leora interrupted, stepping in front of Cale. She knelt down, putting herself at the Telleran's eye level. Hey, Hacks, look at me. The alien blinked, his whiskers twitching. You are human. Yeah, Leora said softly. I am from Colony 9. Dust and debt, right? I know what it is like to be scared of the guys in the shiny uniforms. Hacks lowered the wrench. They said they would kill me. Malik's men. Why? Leora asked gently. Because I saw the logs, Hacks whispered. The stasis chamber malfunction. It was not an accident. I was ordered to bypass the safety relays, but that is not the worst part. What is the worst part? Cale asked, stepping closer. Hacks looked around, terrified. The signal, the override signal that triggered the malfunction. It did not come from the palace, it came from outside the network. From where? Leora asked. From the Vorax. Hacks shuddered. Cale went rigid. The Vorax? That is a myth, an ancient enemy civilization that vanished 1,000 years ago. They are not a myth, Hacks hissed. I saw the frequency signature. Malik is talking to them. He is negotiating. He is going to lower the frontier shields and let the Vorax raid the human colonies. In exchange, the Vorax will destroy the central gate, isolating the capital so Malik has absolute control. Leora felt sick. It wasn't just slavery. It was extinction. Malik was opening the door to the wolves just so he could be king of the castle. "We have to stop him," Leora said, standing up. Her voice didn't tremble. "Hax, you have the data logs?" I hid them," Hax said, "in the station's core server. But I cannot get them. The station is crawling with bounty hunters." "We will get them," Kale promised. That evening, they waited for the station's cycle to shift to night. They sat on the observation deck of the Void Rat, watching the orange nebula swirl outside. Kale was quiet, brooding. "You are thinking about the Vorax," Leora said, handing him a ration bar. "I am thinking about power," Kale corrected. He looked at the bar but didn't eat. "I was raised to believe that the Emperor is the shepherd, and the people are the flock. You protect the flock, but you do not ask the sheep for advice. You move them where they need to go. Sometimes you shear them, and sometimes you sell them to wolves?" Leora asked sharply. "That is what Malik is doing," Kale said. "He sees the human colonies as currency, expendable pieces on a board to buy his own security." "And you?" Leora asked. "How do you see us?" Kale looked at her. The neon light from the station cast shadows across his face. "I used to see numbers," he admitted. "Demographics, labor outputs. But then I met a girl who yelled at a council of 300 nobles because she refused to be a widow for their convenience." He smiled, a small, sad thing. "You taught me that a ruler who does not feel the weight of every life he spends is not a ruler. He is just a butcher with a crown." Leora reached out and took his hand, her fingers laced with his. "I am scared, Kyle," she admitted. "I am scared that to beat Malik, we have to become like him. Ruthless, cold. We won't," Kale said fiercely. "We promise, right here. If I start to get cold, if I start to look at people like numbers, you pull me back, you yell at me, you shove me." "And if I get hard?" Leora asked. "If I stop caring because it hurts too much?" "Then I will remind you of who you are," Kale said softly. He squeezed her hand. "Leora Hayes, the girl who saved the monster." They sat there for a long time, holding hands in the dim light, two fugitives plotting to save a galaxy that didn't know they existed. The peace didn't last. A warning siren blared through the ship. "Proximity alert." The computer screamed, "Hull breach imminent." They scrambled to the cockpit. The view screen showed 3 sleek black interceptors decloaking right outside the docking ring. Imperial hunter killers. "They found us." Kale cursed. They must have tracked the engineer's biometric scan. The comms crackled. "This is Shadow Leader to Station Authority. We have confirmed fugitives in Docking Bay 4. Surrender them, or we open fire." "They are not going to wait for surrender," Leora said, seeing the weapons ports on the ships glow red. They ran for the airlock. They needed to get to the station's core server to get Hax's data, then get out. They burst onto the station promenade. It was chaos. Civilians were screaming as the hunter killers opened fire on the station's hull, blowing out viewports. "There!" a voice shouted. 3 figures in black tactical armor dropped from the upper gantry, blocking their path. Assassins. Kyle moved before Leora could blink. He drew a collapsible energy staff from his belt and engaged. The fight was brutal. Kyle was a master duelist, a blur of motion, but there were 3 of them, and they were enhanced with cybernetics. Leora scrambled for cover behind a crate. She didn't have a weapon. One of the assassins knocked Kale back. A plasma blade sliced across Kale's arm. He shouted in pain, stumbling, his guard dropping. The assassin raised the blade for the kill. "No!" Leora screamed. She didn't run at them. She reached out. She didn't have a circlet. She didn't have a neural link. But the station. The station was old tech. It was built on a backbone of ancient imperial generators. She felt the hum of the station's power grid in the floor. It was dirty, rhythmic, and loud. Leora grabbed that hum with her mind. She pulled. "Wake up." The station's automated defense turrets, massive anti-ship cannons mounted on the ceiling, designed to shoot at asteroids, suddenly swiveled inward. They whirred, targeting logic overridden by a scream of pure resonance. The assassin paused. Looking up, the turrets fired. Not anti-ship rounds, those would have vaporized the deck, but crowd-control suppression bolts. A hail of concussive energy hammered the assassins into the ground. Kale rolled away, gasping. Leora stood up from behind the crate, her hands glowing with that faint golden light. Her eyes were wide, dilated. She felt the station like an extension of her own body. She could feel the airlocks, the gravity plating, the life support. She clenched her fist. The gravity around the assassins increased tenfold. They were pinned to the floor, unable to move. "We are leaving," Leora said, her voice echoing slightly as if amplified by the station's comms. She grabbed Kale, hauling him up. He was bleeding from the arm, looking at her with a mixture of shock and awe. "You hijacked the station," he rasped. I asked it politely. She said, her knees shaking as the adrenaline faded. "Now move." They grabbed the data drive from the server room. Leora simply asked the door to open and it complied, and sprinted back to the Void Rat. As they blasted away from the station, dodging the hunter-killers in a frantic dogfight, Leora patched up Kale's arm in the cockpit. She wrapped the bandage tight, her hands trembling. "You could have died," she whispered. "I did not," Kale said, watching her face. "Because of you. Again." Leora tied off the bandage. She looked at the blood on her hands. She looked at the man sitting in the pilot's chair, the emperor who slept in a waste hauler, who fought for her, who promised to let her save his soul. She realized then, with a terrifying clarity, that there was no going back. She wasn't doing this for the debt anymore. She wasn't doing it for the colony, though she was doing it for him. She had chosen him, not the emperor, but Kale. "I am not leaving you," she said suddenly, breaking the silence of the cockpit. Kale looked at her. "I know." "No," Leora said, meeting his violet eyes. "I mean, even after this, even if we win, even if you get your throne back, I am not going to some moon to retire. I am staying." Kale reached out with his uninjured hand and cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of grease. "I was hoping you would say that," he whispered. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. They stayed there for a long moment, the ship humming around them, speeding into the dark. It was not a kiss, but it was intimate in a way that terrified them both. It was a binding. "Set a course for the capital," Leora whispered. "Let's go take your throne back." The return to Ethelgard was not a homecoming. It was an invasion. The Void Rat, still smelling faintly of fermented biomass, slipped through the orbital blockade using the old smuggler codes Hax had provided. Kale flew with a grim surgical precision, his hands moving over the battered controls. Leora sat beside him, the data drive containing the evidence of Malik's treason resting heavily in her pocket. "It is time," Kale said, his voice low. He tapped a sequence into the comms array. It was not a standard broadcast frequency. It was a pulse, a coded heartbeat sent out on the old Royal Guard channels. Channels that had been silent since the assassination attempt. "The sun is not set. The shadow breaks at noon." It was a simple message, but across the capital, deep in the barracks where loyal soldiers had been marginalized, and in the maintenance tunnels where the cleaning staff whispered. The message was received. The underground network, dormant for months, woke up. "We are clear for atmospheric entry," Leora said, checking the sensors. She felt a strange calm. The fear was gone, burned away by the cold clarity of what they had to do. They landed the Void Rat in a derelict hangar on the outskirts of the city, abandoning the ship that had been their home, their fortress, and their confessional. Cloaked in holographic disguises, Kale appearing as a stooped, elderly archivist, Leora as his plain gray-robed assistant, they moved into the city. The capital was transformed. The shimmering, elegant spires were draped in heavy black banners. Holographic projections of Regent Malik and Lady Saris floated above the streets, their faces solemn and benevolent. "Today we mourn," the speakers intoned. "Today we accept the inevitability of loss. Today we embrace the stewardship." And there were images of Leora, not the Leora she knew, but a digital ghost, a weeping, fragile girl in a white veil, looking lost and broken. "The tragic widow," the voiceover murmured, "a symbol of our fragile peace." "They made me look like a porcelain doll," Leora muttered as they merged with the crowd flowing toward the palace. "I hate porcelain dolls." "They need you to be weak," Kyle whispered, his hand brushing hers beneath his robe. "If you are weak, they are strong." They reached the palace gates. The security was tight, but Kale knew the weaknesses. He knew which scanners had blind spots, which guards could be distracted. They slipped through a service entrance, navigating the labyrinth of corridors Leora had once walked as a prisoner. The halls were lined with propaganda. Statues of Kale's ancestors had been covered, replaced by busts of the regents. It was a soft coup, a rewriting of history in real time. They reached the Great Hall. It was packed. Thousands of nobles, military officers, and planetary governors filled the vast chamber. In the center, on the raised dais, stood the stasis chamber. The lights were dim, casting a funereal gloom over the assembly. Regent Malik stood at the podium, looking resplendent in robes of midnight blue. Lady Saris stood beside him, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Citizens of the Empire," Malik's voice boomed, amplified to reach every corner of the planet. "We gather here with heavy hearts. For months, we have held on to hope, but science has its limits. The Emperor's suffering must end." Leora felt Kale tense beside her. "It is an act of mercy," Malik continued, placing a hand on the control panel of the stasis tank. "To release him, to let the Empire heal under the steady hand of the stewardship." He raised his hand. A technician stepped forward, ready to initiate the shutdown sequence. "Now," Kale whispered. Leora reached into her robe and pulled out the data drive. She didn't need a terminal. She just needed the wall. She pressed the drive against the bioluminescent paneling of the corridor. Her mind reached out, grabbing the resonance of the building. "Wake up," she commanded. "Show them." The lights in the Great Hall died. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The darkness was absolute for a heartbeat. Then, the massive holographic screens that lined the upper walls, screens meant to broadcast the mourning ceremony that flickered to life. But they did not show the regents. They showed text, streaming, red text, secret communique, encryption level, treason. From Regent Malik to Vorak's High Command. Subject: the surrender of the Rim Worlds. Disconnect the Emperor. Blame the human consort. Open the wormhole gate. Chaos is necessary for control. Audio logs played. Malik's unmistakable voice, bargaining with enemy warlords. "Give me the core. and you can have the humans. Burn them. I do not care." Chaos erupted in the hall. Nobles shouted, pointing at the screens. "Lies!" Malik screamed, his voice cracking. "This is a fabrication, a rebel hack. Cut the feed." The technicians scrambled, but the system was locked. Leora held it tight, her mind acting as the firewall. Then, a spotlight, pure, blinding white, slammed down onto the center of the hall, cutting through the darkness. It did not hit the dais. It hit the aisle. Kyle dropped his holographic disguise. The stooped archivist vanished. In his place stood the Emperor. He was not wearing armor. He was wearing simple black clothes, but he looked more regal than any man in gold. His skin glowed with the bioluminescent markings of his lineage, bright and fierce. His violet eyes burned with a cold, terrifying fury. He walked forward. The crowd parted like water. "You wanted a ghost." "Malik?" Kale's voice rang out, not shouting, but amplified by the room's acoustics which seemed to bend to his will. "You wanted a corpse? I am afraid I am very much alive." "Kale!" Lady Saris shrieked, clutching her chest. It is a trick, a clone." "I am no clone. Ant," Kale said, stopping at the foot of the dais. "I am the man you poisoned. I am the man you tried to erase, and I am the man who listened while you sold my people to the wolves." He pointed at the screen. The evidence was damning. Dates, bank transfers, assassination orders. "The regents are traitors," a voice shouted from the crowd. Commander Rian, stepping out from the shadows with a phalanx of loyal guards. Soldiers in the hall looked at each other, confused. Their orders were to protect the regents, but the Emperor was standing right there. Malik, seeing his control slipping, pointed a trembling finger at Kale. "Kill him. He is an imposter. A biological construct created by the rebels." The royal guard hesitated. Guns were raised, then lowered. Then Leora stepped into the light. She let her disguise dissolve. The gray robe shimmered and vanished, revealing her in her own clothes, a simple tunic and trousers. Dusty from the journey, utilitarian and real. She walked to Kale's side. She didn't stand behind him. She stood next to him. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the cameras that were broadcasting this to 1 trillion souls. "I am Leora Hayes," she said. Her voice was steady, carried by the same acoustic trick Kale used. "You know me as the human bride, the girl who was forced, the victim." She took a step forward. "Malik told you I was a pawn. He told you I was weak. He told you I would be a widow." She looked at Malik, her eyes hard. He lied. She turned back to the crowd. "I am not a victim. I am a citizen of the fringe, Dum, and I chose to stand here, not because I was forced, but because I saw the truth. This man," she gestured to Kyle, "is the only one who fought for you while they plotted to sell you." She turned to Kyle. The hall was silent. The tension was suffocating. They were waiting for a speech. They were waiting for politics. Leora didn't give them politics. She reached up and took Kyle's face in her hands. He looked at her, surprised, his violet eyes widening. "I am not leaving you," she whispered, echoing her words from the ship. She pulled him down and kissed him. It was not a polite, diplomatic peck. It was fierce. It was desperate. It was a claim. She kissed him with all the fear and anger and longing she had carried for months. Kale froze for a split second. Then he broke. His arms went around her, pulling her crushed against him. He kissed her back with a hunger that shook the room. The image was broadcast across the galaxy. The dying alien and the human sacrifice, locked in an embrace that burned with life. It shattered the narrative. You couldn't fake that kind of desperation. You couldn't manufacture that kind of heat. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting against each other. "I think that got their attention," Kyle murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Malik saw the shift. He saw the guards lowering their weapons. He saw the nobles looking at the couple with awe instead of pity. He realized it was over. "If I cannot rule it," Malik snarled, pulling a device from his robes, "then I will burn it." He pressed a button. The palace shook. Security Protocol Omega. The AI screamed. Purge mode engaged. The decorative gargoyles lining the upper balconies cracked open. They were not statues. They were defense drones. Hundreds of them swarmed into the air, their weapons charging with red lethal light. "Kill them all," Malik screamed. The drones dived. Kale shoved Leora behind him, raising his hands. A shimmering shield of energy sprang up, deflecting the first volley of plasma fire. "Leora!" "Interface!" Kale shouted. Leora didn't need to be told. She grabbed his hand. "Connect!" The world dissolved into data. She felt the palace. It was in pain. Malik's override was like a virus, a jagged red infection in the system. The drones were screaming, forced to attack their own masters. "Take the core," Kale's mind commanded, steady and strong, an anchor in the storm. Leora reached out. She bypassed the security firewalls. She didn't hack. She resonated. She pushed her own heartbeat, her own anger, into the building's grid. "Stop." The command wasn't just code. It was a wave of golden light that exploded outward from her body. It rippled through the hall. It hit the drones. The red lights on the machines flickered and turned gold. They stopped mid-dive. They hovered, confused. "Target the aggressors," Leora thought. "Defend the Emperor." The drones turned. Hundreds of weapons swiveled toward the dais, toward Malik. Leora felt a rush of power so intense it was intoxicating. She could feel every circuit, every sensor. She could crush Malik with a thought. She could tear the roof off the palace. She felt like a god. "Leora!" Kale's voice cut through the euphoria. "Pull back. I can finish it," she thought, the power singing in her blood. "I can end them. You are not a weapon," Kyle whispered in her mind. "You are Leora. Do not lose yourself. Come back to me." He squeezed her hand in the real world. The sensation grounded her. She felt the warmth of his skin, the beat of his heart. She remembered the taste of the red dust on Colony 9. She remembered who she was. She exhaled. The golden light faded from her eyes. She released the control, leaving the drones hovering in a neutral holding pattern. It was over. Lady Saris had collapsed on the dais, sobbing into her hands. The guards were moving in, surrounding the conspirators. But Malik was not done. With a howl of incoherent rage, he drew a concealed energy blade from his sleeve. He didn't go for Kale. He knew he couldn't beat the Emperor. He lunged for Leora. She saw the flash of blue light. She didn't have time to move, but Kyle did. He threw himself in front of her. The blade struck. Kyle grunted, a sharp, wet sound. The energy blade pierced his side, just below the ribs. "No!" Leora screamed. Kyle didn't fall. He gripped Malik's wrist with his free hand, his strength fueled by adrenaline. He twisted. There was a sickening crack. Malik dropped the knife, screaming. Kale shoved him back. Malik sprawled onto the marble floor. Kale staggered, clutching his side. Blood, dark, shimmering violet blood, seeped through his fingers. Leora caught him as he fell to one knee. "Kale." She pressed her hands over the wound. Her hands were instantly slick with his blood. "I am fine," Kale gasped, his face gray. "Just a scratch." "It is not a scratch!" Leora yelled, panic rising in her throat. "Medic! Get a medic!" Malik scrambled backward, trying to reach the knife. Leora looked up. Her eyes were not golden anymore. They were dark, human, and terrifying. She stood up. She walked over to Malik. He looked up at her, sneering even in defeat. Go on, human. Finish it. Prove you are just as savage as we are. Leora picked up the energy knife. She held it to his throat. The hum of the blade was angry. She wanted to, she wanted to, for the debt, for the fear, for Kale bleeding on the floor. She tightened her grip. Leora, Kale's voice whispered, weak but clear. Choice. She froze. She looked at Malik. He wanted her to do it. He wanted to die a martyr, killed by the savage alien bride. She deactivated the knife. The blade vanished. She tossed the handle aside. It clattered loudly on the stone. Bind him. She ordered the guards. Malik blinked, confused. You will not kill me? I am not you, Leora said coldly. You get a trial. You get a cage. And you get to watch us fix everything you broke. That is your punishment, living to see us win. She turned her back on him. She dropped to her knees beside Kale. Commander Rian was already there, applying a pressure seal to the wound. He will live, Ryan said, looking at Leora with newfound respect. The blade missed the vitals. Leora slumped, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical blow. She took Kale's hand. He squeezed it weakly. You chose mercy, he whispered, looking up at her with hazy eyes. I chose justice, Leora corrected, her voice trembling. Mercy is for people who deserve it. You just get to live. That is all I care about. Kyle smiled, then winced. Deal. The hall was silent. The nobles, the soldiers, the citizens watching on the screens, they all knelt. Not in a wave of synchronized obedience, but slowly, one by one. A ripple of genuine respect. Leora looked around. She saw the sea of bowed heads. She looked down at her hands, stained with violet blood. She had come here as a sacrifice. She was leaving as a savior. But as she leaned her forehead against Kale's shoulder, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart, she knew the most important thing wasn't the crown or the empire. It was the fact that tomorrow, he would wake up, and she would be there. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The trials of the High Council lasted for 3 months, and they were the highest-rated broadcast in the history of the Empire. The citizens of Ethelgard, and the billions watching from the outer fringe, had expected a show trial. They had expected Kale to stand tall and vengeful, handing down sentences like a wrathful god. And while Kale was certainly present, sitting on the sun throne with his wound bandaged and his expression unreadable, it was not the Emperor who captivated the galaxy. It was the Empress. Leora Hayes did not sit on a throne during the proceedings. She paced the floor of the Great Hall, which had been converted into a tribunal. She wore the formal robes of her station, deep violet and silver. But she walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of a colonial farmer inspecting a broken fence. Lord Varys, Leora said, stopping in front of a trembling minister who had managed the Empire's logistics for 40 years. You claim you were unaware that the grain shipments to Sector 7 were being diverted to the warlord fleets. You claim it was a clerical error? It was a vast bureaucracy. Your Majesty, Varys stammered, wiping sweat from his pale brow. Numbers get lost, numbers do not get lost, Leora said. Her voice amplified so it reached the back of the hall without her shouting. Ships get lost, people get lost. But grain tonnage equal to the weight of a small moon does not just vanish unless someone wants it to. She tapped a datapad against her palm. I looked at the logs. Varys. I learned to read supply manifests when I was 12 years old because if the water tank did not balance, my brother did not drink. Do not lie to me about logistics. Varys looked up at the dais, pleading silently to Kale for intervention. Kale merely leaned back, a faint, proud smile playing on his lips, and gestured for Leora to continue. "I am not a token," Leora said, leaning in close to the minister. "And I am not a symbol. I am the woman who is checking your math. And your math is treason." By the time the trials concluded, the image of Leora Hayes had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer the tragic peace bride or the lucky lottery winner. She was the Iron Consort. She was the one who asked the questions that terrified the corrupt. When the dust settled, Malik and Saris were sentenced to exile on a prison moon, a facility with no luxury, no servants, and a very strict schedule. It was a mercy they did not deserve, but it was the justice Leora had insisted upon. Then came the coronation. It was a bright, golden morning when the ceremony took place. The great hall had been scrubbed of the battle scars, the marble repaired, the scorch marks polished away. Kyle stood at the altar, fully healed, his black uniform replaced by the ceremonial white and gold armor of the Ascendant Sovereign. He looked every inch the Galactic ruler, powerful, distant, ethereal. Until Leora walked in. She did not walk behind him. She did not walk with her head bowed. She walked beside him, their steps synchronized. The High Priest, an ancient being whose skin looked like parchment, held up the dual crowns. "By the laws of the First Era," the priest intoned, his voice shaking slightly. "The bond of resonance is recognized. Emperor Kale Draven, Empress Leora Draven, the two who are one." He placed the crowns. Kale's was a jagged halo of silver. Leora's was a delicate, weaving band of gold that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Kale turned to her. He took her hands in front of the entire assembly. "Co-ruler," he said, his voice solemn. "Partner," she replied, squeezing his fingers. They sat on the twin thrones, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the empire was not ruled by a single lonely god, but by a union. The reforms began the next day. Leora found that governing a galaxy was 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror. But she tackled it the way she tackled everything, with blunt honesty and a refusal to be intimidated by tradition. Her first act was the abolition of tribute. She stood before the Senate, a terrifying collection of species from the core worlds who viewed humans as quaint pets, and dropped a heavy document onto the podium. "No more brides," she declared. The Senate murmured. "From this day forward," Leora continued, "the practice of demanding hostages, spouses or children from the outer worlds to secure loyalty is illegal. Loyalty is earned, it is not extorted. If you want a world to follow you, you give them a reason to trust you. You do not kidnap their daughters." "But, Your Majesty," a senator from the reptilian delegation hissed, "it is tradition. It ensures a blood tie. It ensures hatred." Leora snapped, "I should know. I hated you all for months." She looked around the room. "If we are going to build an empire that survives the next century without a civil war, we stop treating people like currency. The outer worlds will have representation. They will have seats in this hall, and they will have the right to say no." The Senate was stunned, but they looked at Kyle, who sat beside her, his violet eyes daring anyone to object. "The Empress speaks for us both," Kale said quietly. The motion passed, but it wasn't just the big laws, it was the culture. Leora began a campaign of aggressive informality within the palace. She instituted open-floor Fridays, where junior staff could speak to the royals without going through 7 layers of secretaries. She replaced the stuffy, silent state dinners with casual buffets because, as she told Kale, "It is impossible to plot a murder while you are trying to balance a plate of appetizers." One afternoon, during a particularly grueling budget meeting with the Minister of Defense, Leora pulled a bag of snacks from under the table. "What is that?" the minister asked, eyeing the bag suspiciously. It was a crinkly silver packet from Earth. "It is called popcorn," Leora said, ripping it open. "It is exploded corn kernels covered in artificial butter. It is terrible for you. Do you want some?" The minister, a towering chitinous insectoid named General Krieg, looked at the kernel Leora offered him. "I do not consume." "Recreational biomass," Krieg said stiffly. "Try it," Leora insisted. "You look stressed." "Krieg, your mandibles are clicking." Kale, sitting at the head of the table, hid a smile behind his hand. "General, I advise you to accept. She will not continue the meeting until you do." Reluctantly, the general took a piece of popcorn. He crunched it. He paused. His antennae twitched. "It is salty," Krieg noted. "It is the taste of freedom," Leora said, sliding the bag toward him. "Now, about the budget for the orbital defense grid. I think we can cut the parade funds by 20%. By the end of the month, General Krieg was known to keep a stash of spicy nuts in his tactical vest. But amidst the laughter and the politics, there was the quiet, steady deepening of the bond between Leora and Kyle. They carved out sanctuaries in the chaos. Their favorite spot was a small, private balcony high on the western spire of the palace, overlooking the capital as the sun set. One morning, they sat there sharing a pot of tea. Leora was wearing a loose silk robe, her feet propped up on the railing, a breach of etiquette that would have given her old tutor. "Zal, a heart attack. You know," Kale said, watching the light catch the golden flecks in her eyes. "I heard a rumor yesterday." "Oh?" Leora asked, biting into a pastry. "Is Malik plotting a comeback from his vegetable garden?" "No," Kale said, smirking. "The rumor is that the Empress once referred to the Emperor as a space crypt keeper." Leora choked on her pastry. She coughed, pounding her chest. "Who told you that?" She wheezed. "I have my sources," Kale said, his eyes dancing with amusement. "Apparently, you also expressed concern that I might croak before the wedding. And you wanted to know if you could keep the ring?" Leora groaned, covering her face with her hands. "I was terrified and sarcastic. It is a defense mechanism. Crypt keeper," Kale mused, leaning back. "I thought I looked rather distinguished in the tank. Mysterious. Tragic." "You looked like a raisin," Leora said, peeking through her fingers. "A silver glowing raisin." "And the tattoos?" Kale asked, gesturing to the markings on his neck. "I thought they were veins," Leora admitted, laughing. "I thought you had some terrible alien disease where your blood glowed. I was ready to sanitize everything." Kyle laughed, a real deep sound that had become more frequent in the last few weeks. He reached out and took her hand. "I am glad you did not sanitize me," he said softly. Leora squeezed his hand. "Me too." The playful tension that had been building between them, the glances across the council table, the lingering touches in the corridors, finally reached its breaking point one evening after a crisis. A solar flare had knocked out the navigation buoys in Sector 4, threatening a massive collision of trade routes. Leora and Kale had spent 12 hours in the command center, their minds linked, co-processing data to reroute thousands of ships manually. It was exhausting. It was intimate. It required a level of trust that went beyond words. When they finally returned to the consort wing, they were drained. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, buzzing sensitivity. Leora collapsed onto the edge of the massive bed. The room sensed their mood and dimmed the lights to a soft, warm amber. The walls hummed with a low, comforting vibration. "We did it," Leora whispered, rubbing her temples. "No ships lost. We did it. Kyle echoed. He did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, watching her. He was still wearing his formal tunic, but the top buttons were undone, revealing the pulse of bioluminescence at his throat. Leora looked up. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, charged with static. "What?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kyle walked toward her. He moved slowly, deliberately. He stopped just inches from her knees. "I almost lost you today," he said quietly. "When the neural load spiked, your vitals dropped. For a second, I thought the connection was too strong. I thought I burned you out." "I am tough," Leora said, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "I told you that." "I know," Kale said. He reached down and brushed his knuckles against her cheek. "But I was terrified." He knelt before her, bringing his face level with hers. His violet eyes were wide, stripped of all imperial barriers. "I have spent my whole life being the Emperor, Leora. I was raised to be a monument, stone, unfeeling. Then you walked into my bedroom and shoved me." Leora let out a shaky laugh. "I really did shove you. You saw me," Kale whispered. "Not the title, me. And today, feeling you in my mind, feeling you hold the line when I was faltering." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I am terrified of failing the Empire, Leora. But I am more terrified of failing you." Leora reached out and ran her hands through his dark hair. She felt the warmth of his skin, the reality of him. "I am scared too," she admitted. "I still wake up sometimes and think this is a dream, that I am still back on the colony, counting credits, that I am going to wake up and you will be gone." She pulled back slightly to look him in the eyes. "But I am not forced anymore. Kyle, I am not the girl who was sold. I am here, and I am choosing." "Choosing what?" Kale breathed. "You," she said. "I choose you." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the desperate public kiss from the Great Hall. This was slow. It was a question and an answer. It was soft, tasting of tea and exhaustion and hope. Kyle made a low sound in his throat and pulled her off the edge of the bed and into his arms. They tumbled back onto the living silk sheets. When they touched, skin to skin, heart to heart, the resonance did not just hum. It sang. Leora felt the familiar jolt of the neural link, but this time, there was no data. There were no ships to pilot, no drones to command. There was only him. She felt his desire, a hot, golden wave that matched her own. She felt his love deep and terrifyingly vast. And he felt her. He felt her surrender, her trust, her fierce protective fire. The room responded to them. The bioluminescent veins in the walls flared with a rhythmic golden light, pulsing in time with their synchronized heartbeats. Outside, deep in the palace infrastructure, technicians looked up from their consoles in confusion. "Sir," a junior engineer called out in the monitoring station, "the central energy core. The harmonics are stabilizing." "What do you mean?" "The variance is gone. The core is humming in perfect unison. It is singing. I have not seen readings this perfect in 3 centuries." They did not know why. They did not know that 20 floors above, the Emperor and Empress were tangling together in the dark, their minds and bodies fusing in a way that bridged the gap between 2 species and healed the ancient, lonely heart of the palace itself. The morning after was bright, annoyingly bright. Leora woke up with the sun hitting her face. She groaned and tried to pull the sheet over her head, but she was pinned. Kyle's arm was draped over her waist, heavy and solid. He was asleep, his face buried in the pillow next to hers, looking younger and softer than she had ever seen him. She watched him for a moment. She traced the silver markings on his shoulder with her fingertip. Hey, she whispered. Wake up, Crypt Keeper. Kale stirred, one violet eye cracked open. Crypt Keeper, he grumbled, his voice rough with sleep. Is that how you address the sovereign of the thousand systems? It is how I address the guy drooling on my pillow, Leora teased. Kale smiled, a slow, lazy smile that made Leora's stomach flip. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. I do not drool, he informed her. I emit royal fluids. Gross. Leora laughed, shoving his shoulder. Kale caught her hand and kissed the palm. He looked at her, his expression turning serious. You saved me, Leora, he said softly. I was dying in that tank. Not physically, maybe, but inside, I was cold. You were the only cure I ever wanted. Leora felt a blush heat her cheeks. She wasn't used to this, the naked sincerity. You are sappy in the morning, she grumbled, burying her face in his chest to hide her smile. I am honest, he said, kissing the top of her head. And I am hungry. Do we have any of that exploded corn? It is called popcorn. And no, it is for breakfast. 2 weeks later, they left the capital. It was a tour of the outer worlds. Kyle insisted on it. He wanted to see the places Malik had tried to sell. And the first stop was Colony 9. The royal shuttle landed on the dusty red landing pad where Leora had once stood in line for water rations. But this time, she walked down the ramp not as a prisoner, but as an empress. The entire colony had turned out. The air was filled with the roar of engines and the cheers of people who had spent their lives being ignored. Leora saw them in the front row. Mom. She broke protocol. She ran down the ramp, ignoring the royal guards who tried to keep pace. She slammed into her mother, hugging her tight. Leora, her mother sobbed, holding her face. You look so different. I am okay. Mom. Leora promised, wiping her mother's tears. I am more than okay. Taryn was there, taller than she remembered. He held up a clumsy metal object that whirred and spun. I finished it. Leora, he shouted over the noise. The atmospheric filter, it works. Leora grabbed him in a headlock, ruffling his hair. I knew you would. Genius. Kale walked up behind her. He did not tower over them. He bowed. Mrs. Hayes, Kale said respectfully. Taryn, thank you for welcoming me. Her mother stared at the Emperor, the man she had thought was a monster. She looked at the way he looked at her daughter, with a gaze full of pride and adoration. Welcome home, Your Majesty, she whispered. Later that day, Leora stood on a makeshift stage in the town square. Thousands of young people, humans, aliens, hybrids, looked up at her. They looked at her the way she had once looked at the stars, with a mix of hunger and fear. I know what you have been told, Leora said into the microphone. You have been told that you are small, that you are pieces to be moved, that your life is a currency to be spent by someone in a high tower. She looked at Kyle, who stood in the wings, watching her. I was sold, she said, her voice hard. I was put on a ship and told to be a sacrifice. But I learned something. Even when they put chains on you, your mind is yours. Your choice is yours. She leaned forward. Do not let them make you expendable. Do not let them tell you that your only value is what you can give up. You are not pawns. You are the players. And if the game is rigged, flip the board. The cheers that erupted were loud enough to shake the dust off the buildings. Before they left, Kale signed the Decree of Autonomy. He stood before the colony elders and formally offered every outer world the right to refuse imperial marriage demands without penalty. It is a small step, Kyle told Leora as they walked back to the shuttle. but it is a start. Leora looked back at the colony, at the red dust, the struggling moisture farms, the people who were smiling for the first time in years. She silently thanked the frightened girl she had been 6 months ago. The girl who had almost given up. You did good, Leora thought. You did good. The tour continued for months, cementing the new era of the Empire, but the universe, as Leora learned, was never content to stay quiet for long. They were inspecting a distant wormhole gate on the very edge of explored space, Sector Omega. It was a lonely, silent place where the stars thinned out into the black void between galaxies. Leora and Kyle stood on the bridge of the flagship, looking at the gate. It was ancient, a swirling vortex of blue fire. Suddenly, the sensor console screamed. "What is that?" Leora asked, stepping toward the station. Her resonance sense flared, a sharp prickle at the base of her skull. Kale looked at the readings, his brow furrowed. "It is a signal," he said. "But not from the gate." "From where?" "From through the gate," Kale said quietly. He put the audio on the speakers. It was not static. It was a pattern, a rhythmic, complex thrumming sound that sounded like a drumbeat or a heartbeat. "Is it the Vorax?" Leora asked, her hand going to the weapon at her hip. "No," Kale said. "The Vorax signature is jagged. This is structured, harmonious." He looked at Leora. "It is a greeting, or a summons." Leora looked at the wormhole. She felt the pull of it, the vast, terrifying unknown on the other side. A new civilization, a new player in the game. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Kale took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, and familiar. "Probably," he said, a spark of excitement lighting up his violet eyes. "But we are not alone this time." Leora smiled. She squeezed his hand. "Let them come," she said. "We can handle it." The story ended there, on the viewing deck of the flagship. Leora Hayes stood next to her husband. She looked at their reflection in the dark glass. 6 months ago, she had been a girl in dirty boots, terrified of a monster in a tank. She had been forced to wed a dying alien. Now, she stood tall, draped in the living silk of an empress, her blood singing with the power of stars. She was not a victim. She was a ruler. She was a wife. And beside her stood Kale, the young, handsome, living galactic emperor who had waited a lifetime to find her. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Ready for the next adventure?" she whispered. "Always," he replied. And together, hand in hand, they watched the stars turn.